Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about a really interesting development which highlights the severe problems that are occurring right now in the Russian economy. Vladimir Putin has reportedly told Russian oligarchs that they need to start giving money back to the state as the cost of the war in Ukraine continues to soar. And in many ways, what we're looking at here is effectively a stealth tax on the rich. It's not a formal tax increase, it's not legislation. It's simply the government, or Vladimir Putin himself, saying to the wealthiest individuals in the country, we need more money and you need to provide it. And that really shows just how desperate Russia is right now for cash. But before we get into all of the details, can I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscriber button? It really does help me with the algorithm, also puts a smile on my face, only takes you a second, doesn't cost you anything, it's not really a subscription. So let's get into the details. According to a recent report from Reuters, President Putin has asked Russia's wealthiest individuals, the oligarchs, and we'll come on to talk about what an oligarch is in a moment, to make direct financial contributions to support the state budget. Now, this is unprecedented. It's never happened before in Russia's history. We're not talking about normal taxation or corporate levies. We're talking about direct contributions, effectively donations, being requested or maybe demanded by the Kremlin. And one oligarch has reportedly already agreed to contribute 100 billion rubles, which is around $1.2 billion. So a serious chunk of change. Now that is a massive amount of money really for any individual to have, never mind to donate to the state. And if one oligarch is doing that, the obvious question is, how many more will follow and how much pressure are they under to do it? Because when you take a step back and look at this, it raises a much bigger issue. Why does Russia suddenly need to go to its billionaires and ask for cash? This isn't something that we've seen happen anywhere else in the world before. And the answer to that is that the war is proving to be extremely expensive and the financial pressure on Russia is building. Russia is dealing with massive military spending, ongoing operational costs, and at the same time, it's facing reduced revenues in a number of areas. Sanctions have impacted its trade, energy exports have become more complicated, and the overall economy is under strain. In addition to that, Ukraine is also attacking all of its oil and gas infrastructure with drones. So what we're seeing here is the government looking for alternative ways to plug the gap, and that's where the oligarchs come in. So let's just take a step back for a moment and talk about what an oligarch actually is and how these individuals became so powerful and so wealthy in the first place. And to understand that, we need to go back in time to the early 1990s and the collapse of the Soviet Union. That took place in 1991. When the Soviet Union broke apart, the state effectively owned everything. It was a communist country, all the major industries, all the natural resources, and all of the infrastructure. And very quickly, the new Russian government moved to privatize all of those assets. But this wasn't a slow, carefully managed process. It was a rapid, chaotic, and in many cases, highly controversial process. Through schemes like loans for shares and other privatization programs, a relatively small group of individuals were able to acquire stakes in some of the most valuable companies, not just in Russia, but in the world. We're talking about oil companies, gas giants, metal businesses, mining operations, banks, assets worth billions, tens of billions, even hundreds of billions of dollars. And in many cases, those assets were acquired at a fraction of their true value. In fact, in all of the cases, they were acquired for the fraction. So effectively, a small group of people gained control of enormous wealth very quickly. And that's how the oligarch class was created. These individuals became incredibly powerful, not just economically, but also politically. They had influence, they had connections, and they controlled huge parts of the Russian economy. Today, there are estimated to be just over 100 billionaires in Russia, many of whom fall into the category of being an oligarch. And collectively, they control hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth. Since the war in Ukraine began, a lot has changed for these individuals. Many have seen their assets frozen overseas. Luxury yachts, properties, bank accounts, all targeted by the sanctions. Some have relocated to countries like the United Arab Emirates or Turkey. Others have remained in Russia, but are operating in a much more constrained environment. So while they are still extremely wealthy, their access to that wealth has in many cases been restricted. And that makes this current situation even more interesting, because what we are now seeing is the Russian state effectively turning back to this group and saying, we need your help. And in some ways, this is a full circle moment. Back in the 1990s, the state transferred vast amounts of wealth to these individuals through privatization. And now, decades later, the state is effectively asking for some of that wealth to be returned. Not through a formal mechanism, not through a clearly defined tax policy, but through direct requests from Vladimir Putin, which in reality carries quite a lot of weight in Russia. When he comes knocking at your door asking for money, he's not the sort of person you want to say no to, because there could be some consequences to that. When the Kremlin asks, it's not really optional. And that's why this story is so important. It tells us a lot about the current state of the Russian economy, because governments don't usually need to do this unless they are under significant financial pressure. It's embarrassing. If tax revenues are strong, if exports are booming, if the budget is in good shape, you don't need to go to your billionaires and ask them for donations. The fact that this is happening suggests that things are much tighter than the official numbers might indicate. And it also highlights the changing relationship between the state and private wealth in Russia. Ultimately, what we're seeing here is something that looks very much like a tax on the rich, but without calling it a tax. There's no legislation, no parliamentary process, no official rate increase. It's simply a directive, an expectation, a request that really can't be refused. And that's why this is such a telling development. So the overall summary of today's video is that the Russian economy right now is really struggling for cash. And this is highlighted by the fact that President Putin has had to reach out to the oligarchs and effectively ask them to start giving money back to the state. This is like a whip round amongst your pals in the pub, except on a much bigger scale. In many ways, this is the equivalent of introducing a tax on the rich, but it's doing it informally outside of the normal system, which tells you just how much pressure the Russian government is under right now. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and a little bit thought-provoking. If you have liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already,